Today is Friday, June 27th, 2014. My name is Jason Higgins, and I'm an intern with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program. Along with me today is Dr. Tanya Fincham, and we are in Stillwater at the OSU Library to interview Marie Shepard, who was a nurse during the Korean War. This is part of the Spotlighting Oklahoma Oral History project. Ms. Shepard, I would like to thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Let's begin with when and where you were born.
When I was born,
Yes, ma'am.
October the 20th, 1929, in Parkersburg, West Virginia. I think it was St. Mary's Hospital. And we lived on a farm and raised horses.
And what was it like growing up in that town?
Well, we lived out in the country, but I grew up feeding horses and cattle and working. I can combine with the best of them. I ran the compound, I mowed, I baled hay, because there was only 2 girls in our family, and you were the boys. And I worked. I grew up working. I knew what it was to work.
And that was during the Great Depression as well.
It was rough. And my dad always said the reason we didn't start this was because we lived on a farm. And you raised everything. And I guess we had a good childhood as far as that was concerned. My mother and father were both. My dad was really smart. He could sit down and figure out anything. And my mother, she liked to cook. So we were okay growing up. I learned how to milk cows. I don't think there's anything on the farm I couldn't do.
How did your family come to West Virginia?
My dad brought a horse over on a ship, in the hold of a ship, a stallion, for somebody that had bought it, and they raised horses in England, so he brought it and he stayed. And somewhere along the line he met my mother, and the story goes, and it's kind of funny, corn. That's okay, just ignore that, that's just my sister. Anyway, he always said that he married my mother because he was pretty good at doctoring horses and cattle. He knew a lot about veterinary medicine. And her dad's cows all got sick, and he went over to look at them, and that's how he met my mother. And he used to tell that story. It'd make her so mad. He said, you know, he couldn't pay his vet bill, so he gave me your mother. It isn't true, but he used to just get her to fuming over that.
Kind of a dowry the opposite way. So growing up on a farm in the Depression, what did you do for fun?
Well, you know, the big thing was the people around there Saturday nights, they would have the old wind-up ice cream makers, and they'd go get a block of ice, and we'd have ice cream.
Wow.
And we played a lot of games. We had a croquet set. We played that all the time.
Was music a lot of your culture in West Virginia?
Yes.
Okay. Did any of your family play any instruments?
Oh, Mom played the guitar. I forgot about that. Yeah, she was pretty good at it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. My dad didn't play any instruments, and my sister didn't. There was just 2 of us.
And do you recall any community celebrations?
Well, the big thing was the old-time revivals out in the country. The Methodist Church would have a revival every so often. We could go, but Mom always said, you can go, but you can't join the church because that's not the one we belong to. And it was the only one around, you know, but we never did. She'd, you can't belong to that because that's not the right church, but you can go to the revival. So big thing was go, and they had the benches out there in the tent, you know. and they would have a revival or something. But as far as going to town, one of the big things was when they go town shopping, you go to the movie in the afternoon for 10 cents. And you could stay all afternoon and get double features and everything.
Wow.
So we used to go to the movie.
Do you have any favorite movies that you remember?
Oh, we watched Roy Rogers. And I don't remember now all of them, but that was one of the, but there wasn't a lot of, not like they are now. We didn't have TV. We didn't even have a radio. And finally, years later, we got a radio, but they had them on the big old batteries, and you probably won't remember that, but you had to take the battery and get it charged up every so often. It was like a big car battery. And you had radios.
And was that during the Roosevelt administration?
It would have been, because I think he was in from 32 to 40-something.
45.
16, he served, well, not quite 16, but he was elected for 16 terms.
Do you remember any of the fireside chats, or were you too young for that?
Too young for that, I can't remember.
Okay. Talk a little bit about your school growing up.
I went to a one-room school where all 8th grades was in the one teacher. And we had all 8 grades, and you'd go up on the recitation seat when it was your class. But you could hear all the others being instructed. And I remember I was the only one in the 1st grade, so I got to go to the 2nd grade because the teachers would put you where they had time to deal with you. So you'd get put ahead a lot. And I missed the 4th grade because that year I jumped out the block to the barn and broke my leg.
Oh, no.
I still have the scars from that. And I missed the whole 4th grade, so I got to go to the 5th grade and skip. And my sister was 3 years behind me.
So you got to go to the same school?
We went to the same school till we got to high school. They didn't have junior high then. You went 8th grade and then you went to high school. There was no junior highs. Then they had school, we walked to school then, but then when we went to high school you had to go to Ripley, which was about 20 miles away, so we had school buses that we got to ride the school bus then. And that was a big thing. You know, all the other kids would be on the bus, and it was fun to ride the school bus to school. We're going way back.
I understand.
You guys, you can't imagine. And I never could, to this day, figure out when the high school we had was just little. I think there was maybe 30 in my class. How I passed the entrance test for WashU. I can't, and WashU was a hard school to get in, because that was in St. Louis after I got out of the military. And I'd gone to Trinity University when I was in the military because they had classes on base. But I didn't think I would, and I applied and I got accepted. And I couldn't believe it, because WashU is really one of the 9th schools in the country as far as getting into. And I got in. And it was the way WashU started was, when it first started, it goes back to 18th. The Jewish students couldn't get in regular schools. They started their own school, and that's how WashU started. The medical students for the doctors weren't accepted at the other colleges, like Yale and Harvard. They didn't accept Jewish students. This is years ago. So they started WashU, and it was WashU Medical School.
Wow.
And Barnes Hospital and Children's in St. Louis was all part of WashU Medical School. So I ended up getting in WashU, and I got an education degree, but I majored in, I had a lot of chemistry and biology and zoology, So I taught school for 5 years. And then they put me up on junior high, and that 1 year, that did it. This is not for me. And I was sitting down at, they were having Art Linklander was making a speech, and I looked down the row at all the teachers sitting there, and I thought, I don't want to look like this 20 years from now. I've got to do something else. So I went over to Barnes Medical School, and I went in, and I told them I was looking for a job. I went to personnel, and they didn't even take an application. They said, we want you to go up and talk to our pathologist. I went upstairs and talked to Dr. Hassan, and he was from, he was an Arab. But he was a Jewish Arab, and it was so funny because he said, there's nothing worse than being a Jewish Arab.
Wow.
But anyway, I left there, and I didn't know if I was hired or not. Monday morning, he calls me, and he said, are you coming to work? And I said, you mean I got a job? And he said, yes. And I said, well, what do I wear? And he said, I don't care what you wear, just show up for work. And I worked for 31 years.
Wow.
There, in that hospital.
Do you have a Jewish ancestry yourself?
No.
Oh, okay.
We're not anything. My dad belonged to the Methodist church, but Mom didn't, and she didn't agree with it, so we just kind of grew up as heathens.
So were you the first in your family to go to college?
Yes.
I bet that made your parents very proud.
Well, my dad died when I was in high school.
I'm sorry to hear that.
He never knew. My mom lived to be 97. She knew. She was happy.
Going back to high school a little bit, did you have any favorite subjects?
Yeah, biology.
Biology.
Chemistry.
Did you have any teachers who made an impression on you?
Well, I never had a teacher I didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Most of them I got along well with. We had a couple that was really nice, like Miss Carpenter, who taught English. She was really nice. Then we had Mr. Jarrett, who was the history teacher. And I read a lot. I was always reading. Anything I could get hold of, I read. So, and my sister did too. She's a reader. She still reads all the time. But that's just about the way I grew up. We were good kids. They didn't have anything for you to get in trouble with. I mean, there was no drugs. Nobody drank. And Mom and Dad, Mom took really good care of us as far as telling us, you know, you don't do that, you don't do this. You always do what you're supposed to do. And my dad always said that you always do what you think is right. And if you feel it's right, then it's not wrong. And you have to do the honorable thing all the time. And that's the way we grew up. But we're still. My daughter is the same way. She's really good. She never got in trouble in her life, and she works hard. She's in charge of the virology lab over here at the vet school, but she also works nights in the chemistry department down at the hospital. She's working right now down there. She works from 2 to 11, I think it is. So she works a lot. And my son-in-law is in journalism school over at here. He's a professor.
Oh.
I think he's been there 14 years or something like that.
What's his name?
Stan Ketterer.
Oh, okay.
Ketterer.
Okay.
ER. Well, what happened was, the way he came out of here was, he used to be the editor of the San Diego Union newspaper. And he got so upset because people couldn't write decent stories. The young professor, or the young writers couldn't. So he said, I'm going back to college and teach them something. So he applied for here. He had a PhD in journalism. And they took him. That was 14 years ago, and he's been here ever since.
Wow.
I don't know if he's teaching them anything or not, but he's trying.
Before you graduated high school, did you have any particularly favorite memories of you and your father?
No, yeah, we were always going to look at horses. I could drive, and he got where he couldn't drive, or didn't like to. So the day he died, I'll never forget, he'd come in and he said, this afternoon we're going to go up the road here and look at some horses for somebody. And he said, would you go with me? And I said, yes, but he said, I've got a horrible headache. I'm going to go lay down for a little bit. And Mom went to look at him later, and he was gone, just like that. I was in high school at the time.
My condolences.
Mm-hmm. He had had an aneurysm and died.
Oh.
And he should have, he had a friend that was a doctor, Dr. Kessler. Dr. Kessler said he should have known what was happening because he'd had enough medicine and stuff and worked with it enough, knew about animals and symptoms and things. He should have known, but he just, and it was just like that.
Did that influence your decision to go into medical training? Did that influence your decision to be a nurse?
No, I always was interested in, I wasn't really a nurse, I'm a med tech.
Med tech, okay.
Yeah, I majored, I worked in all parts of the lab. But no, it was just like I told you, I got the job at Barn, and I really liked it. And I liked chemistry and biology and all that, and it just kind of came natural.
Let's talk a little bit about how you decided to join the military.
Okay, this is my sister. It was her that talked me into it more or less because I had a job. I was working part-time. And she came home from high school and they'd had a recruiter there that day. And she came in and she school all excited and she said, let's join the Air Force. And I said, what do you think? She said, what do you think? And I said, well, times are pretty hard and there was no jobs. In the 50s there wasn't either. It was bad. She said, let's join the Air Force. And I thought about it, and I thought, well, it wouldn't be bad, because I like planes and anything with a motor in it, so that's how it happened. We went over to the recruiting office, and they took us. And we were the only two girls that they had taken. This was the beginning of Korea.
Wow.
And I had trouble getting in because I couldn't get my weight. You had to weigh at least 100 pounds. I couldn't get up to 100 pounds. I drank milkshakes, I ate bananas, I ate everything and ended up losing 2 pounds. Finally, they took us for our physicals and of course she's taller than I am, she's bigger than I am. And they said, there's nothing wrong with her. So they let me go. And we got shipped to Lackland.
Wow.
In San Antonio, and I passed all my physicals, and she did too, and we were in.
Did you discuss it with your mother before you left?
Well, we talked to her about it, and she didn't object because a lot of her family had been in the military, and my dad had a cousin that was in charge of the flight line when Higgins Field in Hawaii was bombed.
Wow.
And he was out there trying to get the planes off of the runway, and they'd bunched them all together because they knew they were going to have trouble, and they came in, destroyed them, just went up the runway, just destroyed them all.
Wow.
And I think they had 2 that didn't get destroyed or something like that. His name was, he was a bird colonel, Colonel Lawrence Barnhart. You might find it in some of the things on Hawaii,
Wow.
Higgins Field.
Right. And you mentioned the relation to Jimmy Doolittle as
Yes,
well.
if I remember right, his mother and my mom's mother, which I never knew or never met any of my grandparents, were sisters. Because when she was at Ellington, they lived there for a while in Houston, he came to see my mom.
Wow.
And he was at Lackland Air Force Base there for a while, and my sister met him because she was a photographer, and she brought him home to meet my mom.
Wow. Fascinating.
We have pictures of them. I was trying to find you a bunch of, but I can't find them. I don't know where they're at. They're in a box somewhere of all those pictures.
What was the training like?
Well, we had the training. It wasn't hard for us. A lot of the other girls were having a lot of trouble passing out from the heat and stuff. But being farm girls and working like we did, it didn't bother us. We were fine.
Wow.
And at this time, the barracks in Lackland didn't have any air conditioner or anything, and everybody was really complaining. And but Corda, we never had any trouble at all. We made it through base. There was 8 weeks of it, and they'd get you up like at 4 in the morning. And we had 4 squadrons at that time from all over the country, and there's 144 in each squadron. So we were squadron 44. We were 44, and then there's 43 and 42 as they came in. And they only had 4 squadrons of girls at that time.
Wow.
And we didn't live on the base with the men. They put us down on Kelly at the officers' quarters, the barracks down there. So they didn't mix them up like they do now. The women were kept separate. And we were treated really well. There was no harassment. I can't ever remember being harassed like they say they are now or anything. I can't even remember one girl getting pregnant in all those years, all that time, because we were looked after, and nobody came in the girls' quarters after 10 o'clock. No men were allowed in there, so we didn't get in trouble. They took good care of us. And the men that we did come in were all respectful, And we talk about Cora and I do, and she said, they should go back to the way it was when we were in. We wouldn't have. We had to learn to fire off. I fired off on a 45. We had to learn how to use a bayonet and how to take care of yourself.
Wow.
But we didn't have any troubles. I can't remember anyone getting in trouble.
So what was it like on graduation from boot camp?
Well, at the big graduation, we had a big parade on there for everyone, the whole base. The men, theirs was in groups like that too, 44. Yeah, but we were 44. Each one had their numbers, like 144, because it was when you marched, it was a square, 12 by 12 by 12, and then you had the little short guy on the end, which was me. Back here, you had the one bringing up the rear. Well, you had to run almost to keep up with them, because most people were bigger than I was. But the graduation was, we all got our first stripe when we graduated. We were a PFC. Everybody got a stripe. I don't think anybody didn't. And then you got shipped out to wherever they were going to ship. Well, they kept me at Lackland. And I was the only girl in the 3700th Air Base group. And why they kept me, I don't know. They shipped my sister to Lowry in Colorado, and most of the rest of them got shipped different bases, And they kept me as permanent party. So they put me in supply at the time. And I was working supply, and a little bit of I did a little bit of everything. And we'd go over and order the food for the mess halls. I'd follow this colonel around with my sheet of paper, and he'd tell us what we wanted, Colonel Cordell, I'll never forget. And I'd end up following him around, and he'd inventory the commissary and that. Well, the way we got in the medics, I had a friend, Captain Healy, and they used to bring the burn patients back from Korea. This is where it came in. And we had one plane called the XC-99. It was a B-36 that was converted into a hospital ship, and they only built one. And the X stands for experimental. The C is cargo. And they would bring the people back from Korea that had been burned with napalm, and they could haul 85 at a time. And they put them in litters, because when people are burnt, you can't touch them. Mm-hmm. The skin comes, it's really bad, and the smell. Sometimes I can still smell it at night. Would smell so bad, and they'd throw silver nitrates all over the plane and all over, and they'd come back, and it turns black after it's set. So to keep them from getting infections, and they'd give them enough morphine on that side to keep them asleep till they could come back. Well, Captain Healy and I used to go down and help them. They'd line the ambulances up along the runway at Kelly. You could hear the XC-99 coming in, and we'd go. It was volunteers. You could go down. We were the only two that did it, though. Go down and help put them on the ambulances and take them over to Brooke Army, because the burn unit is at Brooke Army, and it's huge. If you've ever seen Brooke Army, you know what I'm talking about. And that's where it came in that I ended up working. But I did all kinds of things, and I was the only girl in the whole male squadron. I used to have to inventory the liquor cabinet because I didn't trust anybody else to do it. Because I can't drink. The alcohol makes me deathly sick. So I'd have to go to the NCO club and the officers club and inventory the liquor cabinets. I used to laugh. They said, "Can't you sneak some out?" And I said, "I don't want to sneak any out. I don't want to make me sicker than a horse." But that's what happened. Then I got sent to Goose Bay by mistake. We went to Newfoundland. They need to put a name of extra person on orders to go to fill in a vacant spot. They didn't look to see that it was a woman. They put me on it. I go up there. There's no one there but men, and it's nothing but a radar base. So I got promoted. I had to live in the BOQ. So the only way they could do that, they gave me captain bars. I went from sergeant for a couple of weeks, because I had to live in the BOQ with the other officer, and my roommate was a major. We laughed about that. My sister still said, "I can't believe what happened to you." Finally, they got us straightened out, and General Steele sent a letter and had me sent back to Lackland, and I ended up back in Lackland.
Did they demote you?
Yeah, I lost my bars. You've heard of things like that, though, I'm sure, but I did. For 2 weeks, I was a captain. They say you can retire at the highest rank you ever held, but mine wasn't official. They borrowed some captain's uniform, another girl from up in somewhere else, and gave me a jacket because the skirts all fit. We had those blue straight wool skirts. But I had fun. I did. I cried the day I got discharged. But I'd already been accepted at school, and I thought, I need to do this. It's something I should do.
So after your experiences at Lackland with the burn victims, you decided to volunteer for medic? What was that training like?
They didn't really train us. We just learned on the job. We just learned to handle them certain ways, not to touch. Because when you touch a burn, the skin comes up. And we just transported them.
Okay. And
To
you
the
stayed at
ambulances.
Lackland
We
that
just
time?
helped. I was still stationed at Lackland, but we just helped them get them in the ambulances and helped take them over. We didn't take them over. They took them after but they would have to unload them. And it takes a while to unload, like 85 on stretchers.
Did they wake up after they arrived, any of them?
Some of them did and some didn't. Some would be awake, it depended on how bad they were. But they would take them. They tried to keep them asleep, bringing them back. But we could hear the XC-99 coming in. He could only land at 3 different places. It could land at, they picked him up in Tokyo. Then they could go to Clark in the Philippines and refuel, then come back, and sometimes it'd be Midway or Guam, into Higgins Field in Hawaii, and then into Edwards in California, and then on into Cali. But this plane was huge, and they only built one, and it's at the museum in Dayton, Ohio. They still have it out there.
Wow.
But they only built the one. And Captain Jameson was the pilot. So that's about all I did. I mean, I didn't do a lot.
How long did you do that?
I would say we did that for a year. Then I went back to supply. I worked in supply. I put in a lot of overtime, if you got paid by overtime, just because I wanted to.
So were you able to save up a lot of money during that time?
We didn't make a lot of money. We only made 29. When we went in, we didn't get paid like these people do nowadays. Your salary, when we were in basic, we got $29 a month. But things were cheaper then too, and you could stretch it out and make it, if you didn't smoke or anything, you could make it last. And we weren't allowed to go off base that much, so we didn't spend a lot. We'd go to the PX and get ice cream at night and stuff, but you could make your $29 last a long time. When I got out of the military, I had staff sergeant, and we weren't making that much then. But now then they get a lot of money, and they complain, and my sisters always said, golly, what we could have did with that when we were in it, we got half of what they get.
How long were you in the military?
From June the 19th, 1951, September 1955. I can't remember the exact date.
Wow. And how many different locations were you deployed?
Okay, started out at Lackland, went to Springfield, Massachusetts, from there to Camp Kilmer in New Jersey, and then we went to Newfoundland. Then I went over to Goose Bay and went to Alaska, and then they sent me back to Lackland.
Okay.
I always came back to Lackland. I was discharged from Lackland.
They just couldn't get rid of you.
Couldn't get rid of it, kept getting me back.
And did you stay in supplies your whole term?
Most of it, that's what I was attached to, was supplies. But like being the only girl, you got to do a lot of other stuff. Like I said, inventorying and working, sometimes in the office. You got to be transferred around. Somebody needs somebody to cover here or something like that, they'd send you over there. But I wasn't, I was kind of free to do. It wasn't a whole lot of restrictions.
So what did the only girl on base do for fun?
Well, we went to the base theater a lot because they always had good movies. And you'd go to and they had the swimming pool. And NCO club, we played bingo about every other night. You could play bingo. You could go into town. A bunch of us girls, we always kind of went together. And that was about it. Or take little trips. You could go over to Randolph and hitch a ride and get to go somewhere sometimes on a plane, because that was a training base for the pilots and the navigators. So my friend and I, who was a captain, would go over, and we got to go when they were, like when they set up the C-17s and they'd had the tables in there for doing the sextants, for studying the stars and stuff. They used to take us with us and give us a table too, so we could watch what they were doing. And Randolph was just across town from the air base. And we'd go over there and hitch a ride, and some nights they'd go to New Orleans, fly across the Gulf, you know. You just had to. That was the way, you know. The pilots had pretty much free reign. First, those flights where you could go study, you know, like that. You could go across the bay to New Orleans and land, and then come back. We would be going maybe 3 or 4 hours and come back. We had a lot of fun riding. I got hitched a ride all the way to Langley one night and came back, and then we went to Chanute in Champaign, Illinois, on those flights, those training flights. And if they had an extra seat, you could go. We'd go over there and ask them if we could go with them.
Did you maintain any friendships?
I'm not good at that. A few I did, but now then I don't remember. I don't know any of them. When I leave, I usually just go. I never was much for being somebody that had to have somebody all the time. You know, I had friends, but you know what I mean. You don't get. I never got real close where that was my best friend, and Mom always was against that. Everybody's your friend, but you don't pick out one certain person and make them. And I still don't. I'm pretty much I don't need somebody to help me make up my mind. I can do it, and usually I'm okay.
Did you stay in touch with your sister while she was serving? How did you do that?
Oh, we would talk. She'd write or something like that. My sister was an aerial photographer, and she had top security clearance. And she would be a good one for you to talk to. But there's a lot of stuff yet today she can't tell you, because she was in both Korea and Vietnam. She retired after 23 years. She's a happy person. She's like I am. She's a loner. She does her own thing. And she lives on a farm, and you're going to laugh, but her thing is cats. She got out of military and she went to nursing school. And she has all these cats. And we laugh at her, but they just tend to come to her.
So she made the decision to make it a career?
Yes.
And you made the decision to just
I figured I should go to school, yes. I don't know. Sometimes I'm thinking I wish I would have stayed in, but then I don't know. You can't ever go back. I've thought about it. If I would have went back, I think I would have went into some kind of training or I've probably been their next pilot, because I do have a pilot's license, but it's for a Cessna. I got it when I was working in chemistry at Barnes. So I don't know if the interesting story or not.
Do you have a favorite memory of your time during the Air Force?
I remember the time I never had to march again. We were out, the general's quarters was up here, so we had this big parade field. So they were having a base, 44 men and all the groups, which probably was about 12. So they put me in the 3700th Air Base group on the back of the men. I couldn't keep up with them, and I'm trying to run along behind, and the general happens to be looking out the window, and he said, "I never want to see that woman marching again." And they came down and pulled me out. And I was so embarrassed. But I never had to march again. That really happened.
Wow.
It was General Steele. I can remember. I never want to see that woman marching again. They should have known better than to put me on with all the men, but that was all belonged to Air Base but me. So they said everybody had to be in the parade.
Wow.
They put me on the rear back there. Then the day I got discharged, I cried. I go up to get my discharge, and Captain Wilkins, he had been my boss for a long time because I worked in the office with him. And I'm standing there, and there's tears all rolling down my cheeks. And he said, "Oh, Marie, if you feel so bad about it, why don't you just re-up?" And he said, "I can't, I can't. Captain Wilkins, I've already been accepted towards you." And he said, "Well, I guess you better go to school then. You can always come back." But I did. I can't say anything bad about the military. I can't say it, that there was ever a day that I didn't find something that I liked.
What was most difficult about it?
I think the most difficult about it was in basic, where they were so strict on you, and you didn't get much sleep, and you had to get out there and march in all that hot sun. And I remember one night I was sitting on the barrack steps, and I was thinking, golly, I don't know if I can do this or not. I was talking to myself, and I thought, I don't know. This is more than I bargained for. And then I thought, no, you can do it. And I was homesick. I wanted to go home. And I was sitting there, and I said, no, you don't give up. You can do it. And after that, it changed, and I was fine. But I was talking to myself sitting there. I was sitting in all these little hot fatigues here on the corner of the barrack steps, and I was really down. And I thought, no, I can't do this. I never gave up on anything in my life. I won't do it. And the next day after that, it got easy. It really got easy for me.
Well, you definitely seem like a strong-willed, perseverant,
I
independent woman.
knew if we went back home, my mom would, and I thought, well, if my dad was here, he would be really upset over you giving up. Because he never would let us say, I can't do anything. We could get in really trouble for saying I can't. And I sat there and I talked myself out of it. But I was feeling really bad that night. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening, and just sitting there all by yourself, and you're thinking, I can't do this. But I did. It was hard.
You mentioned that only you and another person volunteered with the burn victim units.
Uh-huh.
How did you deal with that? That seems like that would be very hard to deal with.
It was, but I was okay. Because growing up with animals and seeing horses put down and stuff that happened to them, I was probably better at that than you would think. Because I'd seen a lot of things happen. And it was hard the first couple of times we went down there. And it would be there's nothing that smells worse than burns. It's bad. And after a while, you kind of got over that. But you'd see them. I remember looking down at one, and he'd been hit with some shrapnel plus the burn. And it was a sheet that slid back, and there's a big hole here in his side. And I looked, and I thought I was going to be sick. But he was asleep, and you could they'd stopped the bleeding and that, but you could just see right down into it, And I remember that, and then I remember the burns that go all the way to the bone. Because when that napalm hits you, it don't stop burning. It's got phosphorus in it, and it just burns right down to the bone. There'd just be holes where the napalm is flashed. But then they threw that silver nitrate all over them, and they turn black. It turns everything black it touches.
Did you ever see any of the victims ever again?
No, we never went over to the hospital. After we helped unload them, we never went over there. We just helped get them on the gurneys and covered them up and looked at, You saw it. You could see a lot of it. They tried to keep them, when they brought them in there, on the plane, you don't want anything touching them. They're old, but they would cover them with sheets. And then when I worked at Barnes, we have a big burn unit at Barnes Hospital where I worked. We used to have to go up and see the burn patients. I've been up there a lot of times because sometimes they couldn't get an IV started or they couldn't get blood on and I'd have to go up because I was pretty good at doing that because I'd seen a lot of burn patients. And they used to send me up to the burn unit. And they would have them on these pipes and webbing so they couldn't touch anything. There's nothing worse than burns. And when you see these guys come back all scarred like you see them, you can't imagine what they look like before they're scarred.
Whenever you got out of the military and you started going back to school, what was the most difficult about adjusting back to being a civilian for you?
I can't say that it was that hard. I don't remember. I used to have this reoccurring dream, and this happened for years, about going to school and couldn't find your classroom, but I think everybody's had that. And you'll be going up and down the halls looking for your classroom and you can't find your classroom. Up until like just a few years ago, I used to have that recurring dream all the time. Where you couldn't get, I'd think, I know I'm in Brookings, but I can't find my room, And I don't know why it happened, but then it went away. And I used to have those up until just a few years ago.
Interesting.
And used to sometimes think you smelled. I'd wake up at night and you'd think, that smell, you smell like that plane. But I'm over it now, it's gone.
And when did you join veteran organizations?
I've been an American Legion since 1963.
Did that help having other veterans to be able to relate to?
It's odd because I really get along good with them down there. The other night I stayed and helped them clean up. Everybody else left, and I couldn't do it. I went back and helped Gerald wash dishes. I always do. And the rest of the people eat and get up and leave. I never have. I go back and help them, and we get back there, and it's just like I'm one of the guys. They treat me like one of the guys, you know. We're talking about different things, and I remember Lawrence Roy, the tall guy that dishes out the food.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Marie, are you still pressing your jeans?" And I said, "Yeah, I can't wear a pair of pants without a crease in them." And he said, "My mom always did that. She always creased her." And this was the other night down there, and Gerald says, "I just take them out of the laundry and wear them." And Lawrence, I was surprised that he noticed that I had creases in my jeans. But as far as that, that was the kind of conversation we were having back there.
So did you go to school on the GI Bill? Can you talk a little bit about how that helped you?
Well, it didn't pay as much then as it did now, and the tuition at OOHRP was really high. It was like, back then it was $45 a credit.
Wow.
The GI Bill only paid, they wouldn't pay half of it. I don't think. They didn't pay very much. They paid, I'd end up working and paying the rest of it. But a long time ago, for Vietnam veterans and Korean veterans, they didn't pay a lot of it. And OOHRP was really expensive. Now then, I think they pay all of it. I don't know. It sounds like it when you hear them on TV talking that most of their GI Bill is paid. That's the only thing I ever used on the GI Bill was my school. I never used to buy a house or anything like that. I always just did that without the GI Bill. And I never used FFA. I just went through conventional loans.
Can you talk about your first impressions on campus whenever you got there? What was that like?
Well, I felt a little out because I was a little older. But after a while, I got what didn't bother me, because then there would be more GI veterans coming in to go to school. But first it was a lot of younger kids, and I think, oh, they're so much smarter than I am and everything. But after some of the classes, and I found out that my grades are okay, and I didn't feel so bad. But I used to think, I look over and I think, I wonder if my answer's right. And you know how you're thinking about, and I thought, now he's probably wrong. I was always afraid to copy off anybody. I don't know if you've ever felt like that or not.
I've never copied.
I never copied. I never did either, because I didn't trust
I
them.
would have felt bad too, yeah.
Yeah, I would. They had a bunch that happened here on campus this semester. It's not. It's a secret, but in the journalism school they had 18 of them that was copying or cheating, and Stan's had a horrible time. They had to go back and interview them and make them sign some papers that they'd never do it again. They didn't publicize it, but he was worrying about it because he was telling me, he said, you wouldn't think they would, but he said, we caught 18 of them.
Wow.
Over in the journalism school that was really cheating.
So, did you have boyfriends, or when did you meet your husband?
I met my husband in the military.
Oh, okay.
He was an instructor. We were married for 15 years and then divorced.
So you got married while you were in the military, or you just met him?
Right afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did he stay in the military?
No, he came out and he went to the University of Illinois at Chanute. He was an engineer, electrical engineer, because he worked on airplane engineering, the wiring and stuff on that. And he ended up dying. We were divorced, and then he remarried. And he didn't live very long after. He lost a leg, But that wasn't during the military, that was because of a blood clot, and then it just kept getting worse, and he ended up dying about maybe 15 years ago.
It's terrible.
Yeah. He was
So-
all right. I can't say a bad thing about him. We were fine. He just met somebody else. Somebody else that wasn't Carly, that was more needy than me. That wasn't sitting there, you know, that wasn't always working or doing something.
So, besides educations, what plans did you have after exiting the military? What was your career plans that worked
I
out?
thought I'd teach. That's why I ended up with a teaching certificate at first. And then when I had third grade, I was fine. Those 6 years I taught that. But when they looked at my teaching certificate and they got more picky, it put me on junior high. 6 months, the first semester, I didn't sign a contract because I thought, I don't think I can do these junior highs. They're too wild for me. And I thought, I can't do junior high. So that's when I went to Barnes and put in my application for med-tech and got hired.
Okay.
And it was a lot better and it paid a lot more. And back then, teachers make good now. They didn't when I was teaching back in the 60s. It wasn't a whole lot.
So, you've expressed your interest in history, you taught history, and you participated in the Korean War. What was your ideas or your impressions of the war in general?
It was bad. And I don't think there was a lot of recognition for the Korean and Vietnam veterans. They were more or less, it was like we did it. I mean, you know, nobody praised them like they do nowadays. We weren't, and gave out medals. I can't remember getting medals. There's probably, I think they weren't appreciated because it was more like it was our fault that we were doing. They blamed the veterans a lot. And you know, Vietnam veterans, they booed them and everything when they came back. And they weren't much better to the Korean War veteran. And yet they were sent over there to do that. It wasn't their fault. And there was a lot of them killed. There was a lot of them. And it was bad. The wounds and the people that were left amputees and head injuries and stuff. It was bad.
Has anyone ever expressed their appreciation to you for your service?
Sometimes they'll say, I've had a couple people say, thanks for your service, but I'm not sure they really meant it. But when they were Korean, I think maybe nowadays they need it. I'm not sure. I don't know.
Well, I'd like to thank you for your
Well-
service personally. I
Well-
usually do this at the end, but you're right. I don't think Korean veterans or Vietnam especially got much appreciation. and-
They didn't. We didn't get all the things that they get now. Now then they get like better housing. They get everything better than we did. We hurt. We didn't have a lot. And we didn't have a lot of money to spend. Like I told you, we didn't spend a lot of money because we didn't have it. You got $9 a day per diem if you got shipped out and you had to buy food. We were allowed $9. And they would give us vouchers for $9 for food. And I remember coming from New York City to Lackland the last time they shipped me back. And we didn't get paid on that end. And I came all the way back from New York City to Lackland on 50 cents. And vouchers for meals. Because we couldn't get, and you couldn't get any money on the way. And if it hadn't been for a couple officers and I remember their names. Captain Gray and Captain Weir were traveling with me, and they had some money. So they sprang for lunches a couple times because they knew we didn't get paid, and they knew we didn't have any, except food vouchers, and you could only use those when nobody else were eating on the train. They shipped us back by train. But when they were feeding the regular customers, the military wasn't allowed to go in and eat with them. We had to wait till they cleared the dining rooms out to go eat.
Mm.
And then they talk about Vietnam veterans and Korean being treated, well, we weren't. We were treated like secondhand people or something. But I remember coming on, it took us 3 days to get back. And we stood up some of the time because it was during Christmas rush and the regular paying customers got all the seats. And this is true. I remember standing, and then when they would bunk, they had the Pullmans, but they were so crowded that they were all filled up, and we couldn't have got one anyway. But I came back, and there was a whole bunch of us come back. That's when we came back from up in Massachusetts. They brought us down to Grand Central Station in New York and shipped us back to Lackland. It's about 30 of us on that. And I think I was the only girl.
Do you receive any benefits today for your service?
No, I don't, because I was never wounded. I never had any reason to get benefits.
How did the military build your character or affect your personality?
I think it made us survivors. Like one time they said, you know, if we go down, stick with Marie. She's a survivor. She'll get us out of this. She'll survive. I remember that was one of the sergeants. His name was Hubbard. He said, stick with her. She's a survivor. And it was true.
Mm.
I wouldn't have given up.
Well, perseverance definitely seems to be one of your qualities.
It is. Because, and I'm good. I work well with people, but I'm good by myself too. And I love going and getting cars all over the country and getting to drive all kinds of neat stuff with big motors in it. And I should have been an engineer.
When did you buy your first vehicle?
When I was in high school.
Really?
My dad, we had some cows, and this was it was a 1941 Ford Coupe with a bad clutch. They weren't making cars then.
Mm-hmm.
So he had gave me so many calves, and I sold my calves, and I had enough to buy a used car. Well, the only one you could find anywhere was a 41 Ford Coupe. So I bought it. And I learned how to drive. And back then they had started driver's ed. I had started driver's ed, and I'd taken a little bit of, just a couple of the classes, but I brought my car home, and I took it out in the pasture field. And the clutch was bad, and you had to learn to let the clutch out real slow. Because if you put it out too fast, it would go down through the field, jerking. I don't know if you've ever driven a clutch or not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you know how they jerk.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So after a while I learned how, if you let it out real slow and don't give it too much gas, it'll take off.
Mm-hmm.
And don't jerk. Because you couldn't get parts to fix them. So I learned I learned on that. And I had it for a couple of years. And then the 46 Fords come out. And I was still in high school. And Fred Sayre had got me in a 46 Ford, yellow convertible with the wooden sides. You remember those?
Mm-hmm.
So I kept looking at that, and I'd go down there and I'd look at it every day, and I'd look at it, and finally I had a little bit more money. They didn't cost very much money then, and I had some money they did. So I finally got nerve enough to ask him if I could trade my 41 on that. So we worked out a deal, and I ended up with it. That was my first 2 cars. And then from then on, I think I had a 49 Ford Coupe, one of those pea green ones, and kept building up, and I had a couple others or 3.
So you're a Ford woman, huh?
Best cars made. And finally, the Mustang came out. The first one I saw was black, red interior, white top. I just knew I couldn't keep from looking at them. I just knew I was going to get one of those. So I was working. I forget where I was working at or that. So I bought it in Parkersburg, West Virginia, from Deal was the dealer, and traded for it. And then from then on, I kept trading them. I ended up with a Thunderbird, the 50, and kept going out, and I traded Mercury Cougars for the one I've got. And I had a Thunderbird I sold before I come out here because somebody wanted it. And then I ended up that Mercury Cougar, which is really good. And I didn't have very many miles on it. So Earl up at Thomas Ford wanted it for his daughter. He said, why don't you sell me that Cougar? Because I only had like 60,000 miles on it. And I said, well, I don't see anything I want. So he sent me to Denver. That's how I ended up with the one I'm driving, to bring back a Mustang convertible. By the time I drove it back from Denver, I knew that one was mine. And I walked in, I said, Earl, you can have my Cougar. So that's how I ended up with that one.
Well,
But it was fun, yeah. And I took it home with my daughter, and Stan just had a fit. And Lynn said, Mom, what'd you buy a Mustang for? And I said, 'cause I wanted it.
So, did your mom stay in West Virginia throughout most of her life?
No, my mom came to St. Louis when I was working at Barnes. She finally came to St. Louis and lived with me.
Oh, okay.
And she took care of my daughter, because Linda was little when we were divorced. Linda was only 4 years old. And so she needed a place to live. And then when my sister got out of the military, she came to St. Louis. So she still lives just north of St. Louis.
Let's see. And your sister spent 22 years?
23.
23 years in the military. How had the military affected your family situation, or did it?
It didn't, because my dad had nothing wrong with military, and my mom, they were all pretty military adjusted. They knew what it was all about, and they approved. They did. They didn't give us a hard time. They pretty much let us decide what we were going to do. They didn't say, oh, you can't do that, or that's no fit job for you, or something like that. They didn't do that. They let us decide what we were going to do.
Well, you definitely break a lot of stereotypes for the 1950s, being a female. Can you talk a little bit about that at all?
You mean being the only me? Well, it wasn't a problem, really. After a while, there wasn't that many women in, but being the only girl in the whole squadron had its benefits. because it kind of let you float around, and you got to do a lot of different things and learn a lot of stuff, where usually the men would be tied to one thing, and if they needed help somewhere and being in the office or being there, if they had a vacancy or a job they needed done in another part, you could get to go do it. Because I guess they thought, well, we better get rid of her out of here. We better do something else today.
Yeah. What was it like being a career woman during that time?
Well, we didn't have any, I don't remember ever having a problem. Of course, I'm easy to get along with.
That's a refreshing story.
And I can take a problem and see both sides of it. And I'm not biased. I mean, I'm not going to argue with somebody. I'll turn around and walk away before I'll argue with them. And sometimes I know I'm right, but I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah, another fine quality of yours. So what brought you to Oklahoma?
My daughter.
Oh.
I only had the one, and I lived all by myself, and I had a house. It was a big, pretty good-sized house, and I bought it. I had it built. I had the plans, and I asked them to build me that house. That's when I was working, and they did. It was 3 bedrooms, a living room, a great big living room, a family room, a full basement, 2 baths, and a double garage. And it was mine. Well, Linda kept saying, Mom, sell that house and come out here. And I thought, oh, I don't want to sell my house. Because I'd built it, I'd been in 30-some years, and it was mine. And I thought, she said, well, go ahead and put it up for sale. So I put up the sign, and I kept saying, nobody will buy it. Don't anybody buy it. Second day, it sold.
Wow.
And I cried, and I cried. There goes my house. But would you believe it would have sold? And all the rest of them were sitting around there, and who did they do? Mine sold. But I didn't put a great big price on it because I was trying to be fair about it. I knew what I had in, I knew how much it cost to build, and they were going for double what, or about 3 times what they built, because it was like 40 years old. I built it in 67, I think it was. And they had gone up, and they were nice houses. They were good ranch-style houses, long. They were on big lots off of the end of the golf course, and it sold. And there I am. I had to get out. And so Linda wanted me to come out here, and I got one of those storage places where you pack it yourself. You know what you call them? Pods? That's the way to go, let me tell you. And put everything in a pod, and they moved it out here, and we stored it for a while till I found a place. And I've rent a duplex over on the corner of 6th and Willis, that white brick duplex. It's got 1 bedroom, a big living room, a kitchen, and a garage. And it's enough. It works fine. And I've got my dog, Chase. Chase is my best buddy. Chase is a yellow Labrador Retriever, and I've had him for 14 years, but it's not going to be too much longer. He's getting old.
What year did you move to Stillwater?
06.
06.
I was working, I had retired from Barnes, and I went to work for Mannheim Auctions, and I worked 9 years for Mannheim Auctions in St. Louis, driving cars. I worked on the Ford line, and then when I wasn't working the Ford line, we'd finish with it, I'd go and work the GM line. But we would run 12 lines a day. It's a big auction. It's there in the river bottom. Tuesdays was always the big auctions. Then we'd do the high lines on Wednesday. The high lines are the high dollar cars, like the Mercedes and the Jaguars and all the high dollar cars. And I always worked that line. And then Thursdays we'd do the Chrysler line. And they would have maybe 1,000 Chryslers run on the line. That's how I got to know the dealers here in St. Louis, or here in Tulsa and Stillwater, because they come to St. Louis to buy their cars. And when I came out here, Nichols in Tulsa, the Chrysler dealer, I don't know if you were, but anyway, he'd come out there and buy maybe 35 or 40 cars off the Chrysler line. And his name was Wayne Patterson, and he knew me because they'd always come out, because I always drove those lines. And he knew who I was, and so I told him I was coming out here, and he called Dathan Wilson out here, Wilson Chalet, because that's when Wilson had the Chrysler line, and told him that there was a person from Mannheim coming to Stillwater. So he gave me a letter, and the next day I came out and I went to Dathan. Next day he sent me to Dallas to bring back a car. And I was so lucky. And then from then on I started working for Ford. I worked for Ron Shirley. Yesterday I worked for Barry Sanders. But usually about every day I work all the time. I get to sit and drive so I don't get so out of breath. I have trouble.
Well, you've certainly traveled a lot. And
I've had a good life.
And you've experienced a lot too. What advice would you give to future generations? In other words, what would you like history to say about you?
Well, what I would say is you always do the right thing and you work. And it doesn't matter what job you're on. Do it the best that you can, and I always have. If I'm going to drive, I'm going to be the best. If I'm going to do something, it's going to be the best I can do. And I think that's the main thing. And I think you have to have a good attitude about it. It don't matter what you're doing, you can always find something good in it. I've never had a job I didn't like. And some of them have been kind of crabby. I worked in a bakery one time icing cakes. I got pretty good at it. This is when I was in high school. There was a huge bakery. And they made, you remember these little round pies? And you get them for 10 cents? Well, they come around on a great big table. And they put the little pans here. There's somebody else over here rolling out the dough on a machine. You flop that on the pan. Then somebody has to dip the dipping into them. And you gotta be fast. And you got to get so many cherries in a cherry pie. That was my job. Boy, ice cream dipper. And you can't spill the cherries. I got promoted from that up to doing the lemon meringue pies, which is the 8-inch ones that come around, and they scoop the meringue on it, so you gotta get it on there, you go around the edge, and then you smooth it out like this, you know. You get pretty good at that, too.
Dr. Fincham, did you have any questions you wanted to ask?
Well, when history is written about you, what would you like for it to say? How do you want to be remembered?
That I was always fair and did the right thing. I've always been fair. I would never take somebody over another person or anything like that. And the same way with teaching, I was always fair. And I can't think what I would say. I hope I don't have to go down in history saying anything.
Is there anything that you wanted to discuss that I haven't asked throughout this interview process?
I can't think of anything, and I hope I haven't bored you.
Not at all. Not
I
even a
hope I'm
little bit.
okay. I don't know how the rest of the people interview or
You were
One
great.
of the greatest.
how they do or what they've done, you know.
Well, everyone
For a
has a
woman,
unique story.
I would say that I probably had a lot of experience and a lot of sad things happen, but I never let it. I'll think about it, and sometimes at night I think about things that have happened that I feel really, not that I did it, but things you've seen that you wish you hadn't.
Well, I tend to ask this question particularly to veterans, and you've seen a lot since 1927 in your life, and what are the worst facets of humanity that you've personally experienced? And I also like to ask about the greatest.
The worst that I've seen, probably the wounded. Like I was telling you, the guy with the side, the hunk out of his side were right down to you could see the rib bones and everything. That kind of set me back that day. It was so unexpected. I'd been used to working at burns and stuff like that, but I hadn't seen the shrapnel wounds like that and what they'd done. And I always wondered how they did about it. I mean, how they managed to fill that in, or how I never knew the outcome of it. I guess he lived though. As far as I know, he did. But how they reconstructed it. Because medicine has advanced so much over what we saw in Korea. We were still kind of antiquated. I know some of the machinery and stuff they were using it's so advanced now, some of it I don't even know how to use. That things like that bother me sometimes.
Do you have any regrets from your experiences?
No, and I've always said this. Some people have said, would you trade places with somebody? No. There's nobody I can think of that I would trade a place with.
On the other hand of that first question, what's the greatest aspect of humanity that you've personally experienced?
I think the knowledge and the feelings for other people that you've gotten out of it. You can almost put yourself in somebody that's having a real bad day or something like that in their place and know how they're feeling. I know you see somebody, and I look at people out and I think, I wish there's something you could see them bad. I went to the community sing last night. I don't know if you did down at the community center where they had the orchestras last night. There was a real old man came out of there, and I'm looking at him, and he was having so much trouble walking, and I thought, I know just how he feels. And I imagine he was a veteran because he looked older than me, and he was having a hard time making it to his car. And I wanted to go help him, and I thought, no, I might embarrass him if I do. And I'm almost as bad off as he is, but I watched him for a while, and I knew how he felt. Because you see a lot of people that you wish you could help. See, what I do, this is at nights. I knit and crochet all the time. And the teachers at school tell me the kids that come to school that don't have hats and scarves. I made 15 sets of hats and scarves for them last year and sent to school for little kids. And the same way as the Legion, when they had their pancakes, most of those crafts over there I've made for him, because I had a roommate that was a major, and she was in World War II, and she had lost her best buddy in Italy. Up against a tank crushed her up against a wall in Italy, and we were up in Alaska, and we shared a room, and she'd sit there and knit socks for the colonel and everybody else up in Alaska, and she taught me how to knit and crochet. And we'd sit there at night. She was alcoholic, and she'd sit there and sip her gin and crochet or knit. She was good at knitting, and she wouldn't even have to look at it. She'd just rattle those socks off. But things like that places you've been, and people you've met, and there's an awful lot of good people out here. Like her, you'd never think of, she was she was ready to retire, and she was just kind of sitting back, waiting to retire. She's supposed to retire in a couple of months, and she'd come back from overseas, and she was in the barracks where I was when we lived in the BOQ, and she was nice, and she sat there and knit and crochet. She made Colonel of the Base socks, and they appreciated them. Just things like that. And most veterans you get haven't probably knitted socks.
Unless it was their own.
Yeah, or something like that for people, or sit and knit, they'd probably be up at the club drinking or something like that. She just bring it home with her. And of course, she's saved because I can't drink. It just hits and up it comes. But I don't know. I don't think I've talked this much for a long time because I don't talk a lot.
I've certainly enjoyed it. And, what should people consider before going to war? You've served a lot of time in the military. What would someone who's about to join the military need to consider before they make that decision?
They need to think if they're strong enough to handle it. Because I think some people get in and they don't really realize what they're getting into. I think you're going to have to stop and think, like I did, and talk to yourself and think, can I do this? And some people can't. And I think that's probably what happened to that one that walked away that's in trouble for deserting. I think it just finally got to him and he walked away. Because if you go back and look at his background, he shouldn't have been in there in the first place. You know who I'm talking about.
The guy recently on the news?
Yeah, when they got back and traded the 5 prisoners for him. I don't think he should have been there in the first place. I don't think they can totally blame him. But I think he got in there and he wasn't strong enough to handle it. Because he'd been in the Coast Guard before and they had let him go for some reasons, and it didn't say exactly why. And they don't let you go unless there's some reason, because I've been in where they've let them out and they call unadaptability discharges. I know some girls that got out they just couldn't adapt to military life, and I think that probably happened to him. And they blame them for things like that, but I don't know if it's really the right thing to do or not. Maybe they should do some kind of testing or something before they take somebody in to see what they can handle.
Absolutely.
They don't. There's no kind of testing for that, or they may be now, but not that I know of.
Well, I think that we've gotten your 2 great aspects to your character, perseverance and empathy.
We could not. My dad wouldn't have allowed it. He would have came back. He wouldn't have allowed us to say no. It's like riding a horse. You either ride it or you fall off of it. I got spanked for letting the horse kick me one time. Because I was supposed to know better. Oh, I don't think there's anything else I can tell you. I hope I haven't,
Well, I think that you've shared a lot, and again, I'd like to thank you for your service to your
Well, you're
country, and that,
it was all right. It was to my benefit.
and there is great weight behind those words when I tell that to veterans. And as an oral historian, I'd like to thank you for sharing your story with us, and I hope
Okay.
that others can learn from your experience. Thank you.
You're welcome.